Boa noite, eu sou António Pinto Ribeiro, curador deste ciclo, e quero agradecer a vossa presença e quero vir aqui apresentar a Joan, que foi a curadora deste ciclo de cinema, que está integrado num conjunto de atividades que têm também poesia e têm também debates. E não vou acrescentar muito mais, a não ser que isto é um ciclo cujo objetivo é conhecer melhor a África contemporânea e a sua criação contemporânea. E temos o privilégio de ter estas poetas, esta curadora e outros conferencistas para nos ajudarem a entender melhor este novo mundo tão desconhecido para o Brasil e não só. Joan, muito obrigado.
Thank you, Antonio. And thank you to the Museum of Art, Rio de Janeiro, for inviting me to this. How it's going to work is that I'll give a brief background. Oh, good evening, everybody. Apologies. I'll give a brief background or insight into the South African cinema, and then if you have any questions or comments about the South African film industry, I'll try and answer or listen to as much as possible straight after that. And then we're going to go into a screening of one of the 3 films that I have programmed for this event, which is called White Wedding. And I'd like to apologize beforehand because the copy of the film that I have does not have any Portuguese subtitles, so it's only in English. So I apologize for that glitch in advance. So if you don't mind, can I sit down? Okay, then I can switch this off. Can everyone hear me through this? Yeah, I can hear myself better through this one. Yeah. So the title of this film program that I've put together for this event is called Tumi, which is a Setswana word for happiness. It's a short form for happiness. It can be, Setswana is the language that I speak back home. You know, South Africa has different languages. There's Zulus and Xhosas and Tsongas. I'm Tswana, so we speak Setswana. And in my home language, there's a word called Tumi, which can be short for Witumelo, which means happiness, or Itumeleng, which means to be happy, or Tumelo, which means faith, or Tumisang, which means to rejoice. So I decided to call the program of these 3 films Tumi in order to highlight the positive side of South Africa by showcasing films that celebrate who we are as a people. So it can be films that show us rejoicing, or that we have faith in something, or that we are happy about something. So that's why the title of the program is called Tumi. And the 3 selected films for this program are Hear Me Move, White Wedding, and The African Cipher. And these films all together as an ensemble, they communicate messages of joy, of happiness, of celebration, of forgiveness, of liveliness. You know, the program essentially, I would like to invite the audience to share in that positive side of South Africa with us. African Cipher and Hear Me Move, which are films that will be shown on other days, are films about youth street dance across South African townships in particular, whereas White Wedding, which is the film that you're going to see tonight, is a romance, comedy, buddy, road trip kind of film about friendship, commitment, and love. And these are films that were produced between the years 2009 and 2014, so they're quite recent films. The South African film landscape, as it stands, It has evolved from being one that was a very one-sided storytelling film industry to a very diverse one. And by one-sided, I mean, for example, stories told by white people or non-South Africans about mainly black South Africans, resulting in misrepresentations and untruths. Films such as, it's very funny, whenever I ask people from other parts of the world, like, what South African film do you know? The answer is still, The Gods Must Be Crazy, which is crazy. But there's that film called The Gods Must Be Crazy by a guy named Jamie Ace, which is a degrading film about the Khoisan people of South Africa. You know, the one with the Coca-Cola bottle falling from the sky. I'm sure most of you will remember that image. And then there's a Zulu on My Stoop, which is another popular one by a guy called Leon Schuster, the so-called king of slapstick comedy in South Africa, which is basically blackface and black caricature portrayal of South African cinema. And then there are also those renowned films like Cry Freedom with Denzel Washington and Sarafina with American actor Whoopi Goldberg, where South African leads are portrayed by African Americans, resulting in a butchering of the South African accent and languages. So that has been historically mainly the representation of South African cinema to most of the world. Although there are still some films like that, as recent as last year we saw the famous Mandela Long Walk to Freedom film, which had a British lead. I mean, he's sexy, he's hot, he's to die for, and he played Mandela. His name is Idris Elba. And then we also had the Winnie Mandela film, where the American actor, singer Jennifer Hutton played the lead. In both films, although these are very talented actors in their own right, and there was a lot of money put into the productions of these films, to us South Africans, I'd like to believe that I speak for the majority, I hope, there was a lack of authenticity in the storytelling, which is picked up through the forced accents and the mannerisms of Idris trying to be too hard to be a black Xhosa man, and Jennifer Hudson trying too hard to be a black Xhosa woman. And maybe something that is not picked up much by people who are not familiar with the languages or the mannerisms, but I mean, it's something that sort of when you hear or when you see, you cringe as a South African. So there's still those traces of misrepresentations and untruths that are controlled by who puts the money into productions. If BBC or British Lottery says we're going to put £1 million into this, but you must use Idris Elba, then that's how the story goes. Regardless of that, the South African film industry, I believe, has grown in leaps and bounds. There are a lot more young black directors and producers telling stories through film and television. The government has also upped its game by investing in the industry. There's institutions such as the National Film and Video Foundation, the Gauteng Film Commission, the Durban Film Office, the Cape Town Film Office, and the Department of Trade Industry that has injected a substantial amount of money into making sure that there are more films being made by black, particularly young South Africans, and that these stories get to travel to world festivals and markets. So there's a lot of financial support in that regard. Essentially, that there are stories by the people for the people. The past 20 years, we know that South Africa is celebrating 20 years of democracy in 2014. We're going towards the end of that. The past 20 years has seen more and more of such stories for the people, by the people being told. Although it's gradual, slowly but surely we're getting there. I'd like to believe that the film industry in South Africa is going through what I call a retrojection phase. And by retrojection, it's a word that I made up, which is composed of retrospection and projection, alluding to the idea of looking at where we come from as a nation, assessing and evaluating it, and then using that to map out the way forward. South Africa is infamous for the scourge called apartheid, a method of segregation amongst the different racial groups of the land, an institutionalized system of oppression of the black majority by the white minority. When democracy arrived in 1994, in the early 90s, and struggle organizations were unbanned, and Nelson Mandela was released and became president. You know, history was made. The first democratically elected president was sworn into power in 1994. A black president voted for by South Africa's children. The words "amandla awethu" never rang true as they did on that day when Mandela was made president. The power was indeed in our hands. We were free. A rainbow nation was born. It's been 20 years since that democracy. The new South Africa has gone through 4 democratic elections, and 3 presidents. And unfortunately, Mandela left us in December last year. You know, has this transformation worked out to be the best? A lot of people are asking questions about how far we have come in those 20 years. Has the transformation happened? Where have we succeeded? Where have we failed? And on the global scale, democracy scale index, how has South Africa done? A good way to gauge or indicate the progress or the regress, I don't know if it's regress or regression, would be to zoom into looking through changes in society. And one of the societal sectors we can zoom in on would be looking at the South African film industry. And I believe that is what this retrojection phase does of the film industry, mapping out the change in the South African society between 1994 and 2014 by looking at the changes and developments in its industry, in its film industry within those 20 years. Right now, when we talk about our greatest trailblazers of this retrojection phase, we are talking about the likes of, I'd like you to listen to these names as I call them out. Kalo Matabane, Rian Hendricks, Tebogo Atkins, Sarah Blecher, Tebogo Mahlatsi, Craig Fremont, Brian Little, Ariel Lalu, Vincent Moloi, Rapulana Sipemo, Rihad Desai, Lerato Shadi, Dineo Bopape, Donovan Marsh, Norman Make, Zanele Moholi, and many others I could go on and on mentioning. But when you listen to me calling out those names, you can hear, as I mention those names, that it is a mixed masala of names. It's a mixed bag of names, a choice assorted bag of names. And therein lies the diversity in the film industry right now. It's no longer your Ace and Schusters and Van Wyks, and it's people from across the racial spectrum of South Africa uniting in this movement to tell the South African story. And themes that are coming up from South African films at the moment are no longer just about politics and apartheid and all the gloomy sadness that we know about the country. But there's issues of sexuality, of youth culture, of what we call the born-free generation, which are youth that were, or kids that were born after 1994 and were born into the democracy. Food, music, fashion, architecture, art, environmental issues, love, and other refreshing tales. These are some of the stories that are coming out of South Africa. And the film that you're about to see is, I would like to believe, one of the most refreshing South African films I've seen on a lighter note in a long time, which still talks to issues that we have of South Africa, but in a light way. And it's a story that is written by South Africans who also play the lead in the film. The two guys that play the lead are the ones that wrote the script. So I'd like you to enjoy or take a bite out of that happiness or light-hearted part of the South African cinema. And this is where I would like to end and open up to any questions at this point or comments. There's a mic. Or clarity, if need be. Should we go straight into the film? Okay. Does everyone understand English? No. Okay. So after the film, I'll be available for any questions. Yeah. Thank you. I don't know if there's anyone with questions in the room or comments. What did you think of the film? Maybe I should ask the first question.
Just like you said.
I mean, did you get a bite of what I had hoped you would get of South Africa through the film?
It is from 2009?
White Wedding, 2009, yes. 2009. Anybody else?
Is Jan Turner's daughter?
Yes, actually, she is. Shall we call it a night?
Well, maybe a comment. I thought it's quite interesting because I didn't hear what you said before, but because I came in later, but it's a comedy, right? And I thought it's interesting to see like the different layers of South African society.
Can anyone hear?
Different layers of South African society in film, but in a comedic way. For instance, I thought it was interesting, like especially the scene where they entered that bar full of white people, and it shows quite how like South Africa still has problems of racism, but I thought it was interestingly done, like in a
Interesting take on that aspect.
Yeah, on that aspect, definitely.
Okay.
I don't know what everyone else thought of it, but I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, also because I think that South Africa is quite far away.
Oh, there's another one.
I think it's a very happy film, but I think that the reality in South Africa is quite far away from being the rainbow nation, and so I don't know at which point is when you represent this outside South Africa is like almost deny a part of the reality that is still alive.
Like, I'm not sure I understand.
No, I think I know what she's. Yeah, I think that what she's trying to say is like the film kind of portrays like South Africa as the happy rainbow nation, everyone's getting along, but really the reality is far from what is depicted in the film.
Yeah.
Having said that, I don't think that the film shows like a beautiful rainbow nation, but I
No.
didn't get that actually, to be honest.
That's not what I understood her to say. I think
No?
she was saying exactly that the film kind of in a light-hearted way depicts how maybe not how fast we have progressed, but what maybe the reality. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, I mean, on the ground, I think it's a very gradual process, and there's little pockets where maybe it's happening at a faster rate, but we still have a long way to go as a country. But I think it's a gradual process. Anybody? It's finished. Yeah. Okay, thank you everyone for coming.
Gente, nós agradecemos a presença de todos e todas. A programação continua amanhã e sábado, conforme vocês receberam aí no caderninho todo detalhado. Aguardamos vocês também nas próximas atividades. Obrigada.